Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie. And in this video, I want to look at the new moon, which takes place on Sunday, January the 18th, 2026. Now, in the thumbnail, I've said January the 16th to the 18th for new moon. Well, the new moon really starts on Friday because, that is when the moon enters Capricorn, because you've got the moon in Capricorn and you've got the sun in Capricorn as well. So perhaps we shouldn't necessarily always see the new moon as a single event. We can perhaps instead see it as a broader period of time where something is starting, where the moon is in a process of change. So in this video, I want to sort of accomplish several things. I want to look at the broad period, from Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Friday the 16th through to Sunday the 18th. And also I want to look beyond the new moon, the new moon itself, perhaps looking broadly at the next couple of weeks. So let's start off by considering the beginning, when the moon moves into Capricorn. So here is the chart for that beginning. By the way, don't forget to like and subscribe if appropriate. So on Friday at 6:47 a.m. New York time, moon moves into Capricorn, and so the moon is at that point in the same sign as the sun. And so, there is a new moon feel to it. I mean, that's what the new moon is all about, having the sun and the moon in the same sign. And, what this means is that we have 5 planets in Capricorn for a brief period of time. I mean, look at Venus. Venus is about to leave Capricorn and move into Aquarius, but there is a time when we've got a massive Capricorn emphasis. We indeed have 5 traditional planets, not just 5 traditional planets, but the 5 personal planets, all in Capricorn. So we've got a massive, massive Capricorn emphasis, and arguably we've also got this 4-planet conjunction, and it's not even arguably, we have got a 4-planet conjunction between Mercury, Mars, Sun and Venus, and the moon will catch up with them all. So think about Capricorn as we move into the weekend of the 18th and the 19th. It's really all over the place, and very often things reach their peak just before the end. It's almost like you get the blow off top in Capricorn. It doesn't get any more Capricorn than this. So that might say something about how you're moving into the weekend. Perhaps with all this Capricorn emphasis, one is thinking about the material world and what one is trying to achieve and get together. And this might relate to money or one's ambitions, or when you're talking about the earth signs, it just can be about the earth, how we relate to our natural environment. And so we might be able to, in some respects, ground ourselves with all these planets in Capricorn. But this is peak Capricorn, and as we move into the weekend, things change, and in particular Venus moves out of Capricorn and it moves into Aquarius. So it does mark the beginning of the end, because very quickly one planet after another will move into Aquarius, and I think that is a real change here. And I'm going to be going into the new moon in sort of detail throughout this video, and in the last part of this video I'm really going to be going into it. I should tell you something about the structure. I'm going to be just looking broad picture now. I'm going to go through the 12 signs, how the new moon might affect the 12 signs, and then at the end of the video I'm really going to look at the new moon specifically and perhaps look at a few places and people that might be impacted by it. And one thing happening at the same time as this new moon is a square between Mercury and Chiron. And we talked about Sun square Chiron, Mars square Chiron, but we've also got Mercury square Chiron. And that is quite an interesting aspect. You've got Mercury in Capricorn is perhaps a way of thinking that is maybe quite orderly. We have to concentrate on what matters and make sure we perhaps got the material details sorted out. And there is something quite methodical about Mercury in Capricorn. But Mercury is kind of disturbed. What is disturbing Mercury? Well, Mercury is moving towards a conjunction of Mars, and it's moving towards a square of Chiron. So Mars and Chiron are already making a square. They made the exact square quite a few days ago, but it's still around. And so Mercury sort of moving into that Mars-Chiron square might represent an agitation. And we shouldn't forget that Mercury is the communication planet. It's also the planet of thinking. So Chiron, as I've argued, is the planet of rebellion, doing things differently, thinking outside the box. And so Mercury in Capricorn on its own doesn't really think outside the box, but it's square to Chiron. That is a challenge, and it challenges us to think about things in new ways, and also to say things which might be controversial. We observe things, and we can't just keep them to ourselves. We have to be open and honest, and in certain cases disruptive. But even if we don't say anything, what are our thoughts doing? Our thoughts could be all over the place, and our thoughts might they might be disturbing, but that is a good thing. And of course Mercury is also making a conjunction to Mars, and this is all happening at the same time as the new moon. And so this new moon is being coloured by what Mercury is doing, and there is stuff to think about. And in terms of the thumbnail of this video, I've said this new moon is a kind of a final reckoning. That might sound a bit dramatic. So why do I say final reckoning? I mean, sure, I'll be explaining this in greater detail at the end of a video, but you probably need to know why final reckoning. I think my issue with this new moon is that it's very late degrees. It's what is it, 28? Was it 28:44, something like that? 28:44 Capricorn. I think I've got that right. 28:44 Capricorn. So that's where this new moon is. And so I'm thinking, you think new moon, new beginning, but this new moon is right at the end of Capricorn. It's at the moment where Capricorn is starting to peak. As you can see, by the time of the exact new moon on Sunday, Capricorn has already peaked because Venus has moved into Aquarius. And I think that with this new moon, there is a certain sense of looking backwards. And again, that's not what we normally think about with new moons, because with new moons we think about the future, new beginning, new lunar cycle. Full moons are more about looking backwards and coming to conclusions, big realizations. But this new moon, right at the end of Capricorn, right at the end of the sign, not right at the beginning of the sign, right at the end of the sign, and it occurs to us, perhaps with this new moon, that something is coming to an end, and Capricorn is coming to an end, and a lot of other things are coming to an end, and people have done things in the past, and now perhaps it is a final reckoning. I mean, I know final reckoning, might sound rather dramatic. You might be thinking of judgment, And that's why I've stuck that tarot card on the thumbnail. Le Jugement from the Marseille Tarot Pack, because that is perhaps a time when we have to look back and see what has been done. Did it work? Did it not work? And that might be a lot about what we need to consider. But I will be talking in detail about this about the new moon later in the video. But I just think the fact that it is in very late degrees does say so much about what is going on. And we have the beginning of this reckoning starting now. As far as I'm concerned, it starts with this with the moon going into Capricorn, which takes place, as I said, 6:47 a.m. New York time. So that's a bit later London time. That's 11:05. That would be 11:47 a.m. London time on Friday. Very late in the day if you're in Australia, New Zealand. In fact, here is the chart for the moon going into Capricorn from the perspective of Sydney, Australia. So if you're in Sydney, Australia, the moon goes into Capricorn at 10:47 p.m. On Friday, and if you're in New Zealand, I think it actually will go into Capricorn, very early on Saturday. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to look at the new moon from the perspective of the 12 signs. And these 12 sign readings will have sort of a short-term element. We're talking about the new moon as it unfolds, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, once the moon moves into Capricorn. And then I want to consider the sort of broader picture, for example, how the next fortnight or perhaps longer, is going to unfold. And having done that, I'm going to do an I Ching reading where I'm going to ask a question, what is this new moon going to be like for those watching this video? And then right at the end of the video, I will be looking at the new moon in particular detail, going beyond the personal and looking at the global, and I'll be going into things like the midpoints and some of the specific elements of this new moon in a general sense. So anyway, these are my 12 sign readings for this new moon. Aries, it's an important new moon. It's right at the end of Capricorn, and Capricorn is a sign that matters if you're an Aries. Capricorn is a sign that's very much relevant to your future, how you perceive your future, and also to your ambitions. And you've had a lot of planets moving through Capricorn, and you have perhaps been thinking about what needs to be done. And now that Capricorn season is coming to an end, Aries, you may be thinking, well, what have you accomplished so far? What has the last month been like? And with this new moon, you're reaching some conclusions. And it could be a time of reckoning. I mean, not necessarily in terms of external events, but in terms of how you perceive yourself and what you have accomplished so far. You might be of the view that there are things that haven't been done well enough. You might give yourself 6 out of 10, and then with this new moon, be thinking, well, what can you do? It seems that maybe the sands of time are running out. But you have to ask, why is this happening? Is it just about sheer ambition? You perhaps trying to fit in with what other people are expecting of you. Not just what they're expecting of you now, but maybe what they were expecting of you. these expectations can go back into the distant past. They can, for example, be about what your parents expected of you when you were a child, and it now may be sort of all sort of coming together. And there might be strong memories here. And so there is a view, Aries, that you are looking back in the mirror. You can see the road that you've just come down, and you can see what you've done and what you haven't done. And there may be moments where you feel a sense of drama. We shouldn't forget, by the way, that this new moon is trine Uranus, and so this new moon trine Uranus in Taurus, Aries, could just make you feel that really that something dramatic perhaps needs to happen, not just has happened, but must happen. I mean, that is a natural feeling if you think that you're embarking on the next stage, but the previous stage is not necessarily finished. So you might be of a view that things do have to happen, very, very quickly, and you can act quickly if need be. But with this new moon, Aries, you don't want to be in a panic. You don't want to think that everything has to be done at once, and you shouldn't forget that Mars is still in Capricorn, and Mars is going to look after you in Capricorn. Mars is exalted in Capricorn, and Mars is very much tied up with this new moon, because Mars is making a conjunction to this lunation. It's also making a conjunction to Mercury, so it is a time of power. And it's possible that when you look back on the past, that you've somewhat underestimated yourself. You perhaps took the view that, or are taking the view, that you haven't necessarily accomplished very much. And so that might mean that you have a sort of a tinge of negativity. But it could be the case that you have actually done the preparations and that things can now come together very quickly, and it needn't necessarily take much effort. After all, this new moon is trine Uranus, and also Mars is moving towards a trine to Uranus. So Mars trine Uranus, it is a dramatic aspect, and it perhaps means that you can create real effects. And this new moon, it is kind of interesting because it does take place in in Capricorn. That is true. But the moment it happens, the moon moves into Aquarius. And there are other things that are moving into Aquarius as well. I mean, Venus moves into Aquarius, over the weekend. And, Aquarius and Capricorn, okay, they're both signs ruled by Saturn. But from an Aries perspective, there are differences. I mean, Capricorn is, of course, an earth sign. It may be about your ambitions, perhaps in quite a materialistic way. Aquarius is also about your ambitions, but a different kind of ambition. An ambition which is more aligned with your destiny, and an ambition about how you'd like things to be, about your hopes and wishes. What kind of future do you want for yourself? And that's not about just material goals. It's about happiness and satisfaction. So with this new moon, it might all start off as feeling that it is about hitting particular goals, but then on reflection, Aries, you start to realize that something else is going on. It's about you aligning to the wider future, and that might be how you feel, over the next few weeks as these planets move into Aquarius. You want to do something that makes you happy, and that's such an Aries thing. Aries fundamentally is not a particularly ambitious sign. I mean, Arians can be very successful, but part of the key to being a successful Aries is, thinking beyond the material. You think, what is your wider goal? And I think that is something that you can really start to concentrate on as these planets move into Aquarius. So you might see with this new moon, the ending of one approach to your ambitions and the beginning of something new, having a wider approach and something that is more in tune with who you are. I mean, part of what life is about is being able to escape the ties from the past, the expectations from the past, and doing something that is really important to you. It's not important to anyone else. And while this new moon is unfolding, we should not forget that Mars is still square Chiron. I mean, I've talked about Mars square Chiron, some days ago, but Chiron, is in Aries, and Mars and Mercury is making a square to Chiron at the same time as this new moon, and Chiron is challenging you. It's wanting you to do things differently. It's you rebelling, perhaps, against the past, and indeed the pressures from the past. We're all pushed into following a particular path, and we're supposed to do things by the book, and we've got these expectations to think about, as I was just talking about, maybe from our friends or our family, expectations from members of our family who may not be around anymore, but were still there. And with this new moon taking place at the same time as Mars and Mercury square Chiron, it might be that the next couple of weeks, not just right now, not just today, Friday or Saturday, it might be over the next couple of weeks. It might be a time to really make it clear who we are and who we are not. And sometimes it's necessary to do something that is outrageous, because if we do something outrageous, we are making our position clear. It's all completely unambiguous, and that might in fact be part of what this new moon is. I mean, recently, perhaps Aries, you've been somewhat sort of understated. You perhaps felt there was just something that had to be done, and now you're moving from one thing to another, and you're asking yourself, what next? And perhaps you're also thinking that nothing lasts forever. Indeed, life doesn't last forever, and before it all comes to an end, you want to make sure that you are doing something that you are happy about, and also that is in accordance with who you are. You have hopes, you have wishes, things you would just like to happen. And now, Aries, I think that this new moon is hopefully going to allow you to get the past in perspective. Not beat yourself up about the past. You might think short term that there are things you haven't accomplished, but who knows? Certain things have their own momentum, and you might be halfway through something, or maybe 99% of the way through something, and you think you haven't even started, and then over the next few days it might occur to you that really it is finished, and that it is now time for something new. And I think that overall this new moon is going to be positive, and it's going to be dynamic. Remember, this new moon is trine Mars, and it's conjunct Mars, and it's trine Uranus. So it could be an exciting beginning for you. Taurus. Well, this new moon that we have is perhaps quite inspirational. It might allow you to move beyond the here and now, and to become aware of maybe something else. When I say something else, I could easily be thinking about the spiritual dimension. It is a spiritual new moon, but in a very Taurean way. So when we think about Taurus and spirituality, we are often thinking about the earth and what you can touch, and in many respects Taurus is one of the most spiritual of the 12 signs, because Taurus just kind of knows that there's something else out there. Well, particularly a Taurus who's watching a video like this on astrology. I don't think many people watching astrology videos, for example, are atheists and believe that there is just nothing out there. I mean, I think you can actually be an astrologer and an atheist. I think it's possible, but I'm not going to talk about that here. And this new moon in Capricorn, at the end of Capricorn, does mean that you really want to be part of a wider whole. And so when you look at the environment, when you look at the trees, the grass, things that are growing around you, that there's something beyond yourself, and this might be particularly important at the time of this new moon. And also with this new moon, it might feel that there is an accumulation of knowledge and experience and insight, and it's been accumulating for some time. And to begin with, it might have been difficult to work out. You were trying to get your head around something new, and that can be, a Taurean approach. Taureans can take their time. They have to get involved in something new, and to begin with, they're a bit suspicious of the new, but they keep going. It's hard work, and it just feels a bit sort of clunky and doesn't feel very natural. And yeah, it does take you sometimes longer than other people, but once you get it, you really get it. And that's a great thing about being a Taurus. It is that persistence. And so we might be dealing here with this new moon. Remember, it's very, very late in Capricorn, with an accumulation of insight. And it's just taken a long time, is taking a long time. And this new moon itself is trine Uranus. And Uranus, don't forget, is in your sign. Uranus is in Taurus, late Taurus, in the same way that we've got a new moon in late Capricorn. And this new moon, therefore, could be quite inspirational. It could be quite shocking, but shocking in a good way. Perhaps there's been a long period where things have been building up. You've had different insights, and one insight has led to another insight, and there was a long period where things just didn't make sense. And now, with the new moon trine Uranus, there may be just a moment where it just comes clear, and you see the truth. You see what is obvious, and you see what you have to do. Where you're going. And so there could be a sense that you understand that not just that something else is looking after you, but also that you have been given maybe some kind of mission, some kind of purpose, and now it's coming together. Now, I mean, I know that sounds rather sort of pie in the sky. I mean, there is a more down to earth way of looking at it. It might be, if we're very grounded about it, is that there is just an accumulation of knowledge that's been taking place over the last few weeks, maybe the last few months, maybe since the end of last year. An accumulation of knowledge, and one thing has been building onto another, and it's taken you time. Maybe knowledge about something very material. I don't know, knowledge about how to use a computer, knowledge about some skill that you've been trying to pick up, or it could be a language, or just a general accumulation of knowledge, or it might have a political dimension. All of us, maybe not all of us, maybe I don't want to project there. I've got Taurus rising, don't forget. I don't want to project, but all of us are picking up what's going on politically. Many of us are picking up on what's going on politically, and we're perhaps getting insights into what's happening in this world. There's no such thing, I should make it clear, as an objective truth. And we're being pushed this way and that. And so for some Taurians, it might be just an understanding of what's happening politically, what's happening socially and economically, and how you fit in with it all. And yeah, it's taken its time, and maybe there have been shocks. And going back to this new moon trine Uranus, it just occurs to you what it's really all about. Now, the thing about this new moon is, we say that this new moon is in Capricorn, in late Capricorn, but that is a simplification, because this new moon kind of has an Aquarian feel to it. Why does it have an Aquarian feel to it? Because the moment you've had the new moon, the moon goes into Aquarius. The full moon, which I think there's a full moon on February the 1st, when this lunar cycle, which is just beginning, when it completely unfolds, this full moon is going to be in Leo. In other words, you're going to have the sun in Aquarius and the moon in Leo. So there is an implied Aquarian feel to this new moon, which doesn't immediately manifest. And so the way we might see it is that what's happening now, it's a moment of preparation. But as planets move into Aquarius, you change. Your perspective changes. The period of preparation is over, and this new moon is a beginning of a new focus. It's a time, Taurus, where you are concentrating on the things that are important to you, and you are supported by your knowledge, by your accumulated knowledge. And you can now make decisions about your future based on what you know, based on what is absolutely obvious. And this might mean, for example, that this new moon might have a strong career dimension to it. So if you've been puzzled about your career, if you have a career, I don't know what you're doing. People come into this reading at different stages in their lives. But if you are in a job, this new moon may, in the end, be about you making a decision about what you want to do. I mean, even if you're in an existing job, that may say something about your priorities or your various responsibilities. So it might say something about that. If you're looking for a job, then when the moon goes into Aquarius, and certainly when the sun moves into Aquarius, then you will have much greater clarity, and perhaps all of your preparation, will make sense. And one thing to say about this new moon is that when it actually happens, Venus will be in Aquarius. Venus will be right at the beginning of Aquarius. So Venus in Aquarius, remember, Venus is the ruler, is Taurus's ruler. So Venus in Aquarius is going to say, a great deal about how you relate to this new moon. And yeah, Venus in Aquarius is about what you are trying to achieve. It may say something about your ambitions and how you are trying to project yourself, especially as Venus is conjunct Pluto, or is moving towards a conjunction of Pluto. So you can really feel with this new moon, the power of Pluto in Aquarius. And Pluto in Aquarius is about you basically telling the world that you've understood things, you know what it's all about, and now you want to create change, and you want to create a change in terms of creating a situation where you can not just be yourself, but you can push forward with your ambitions, whatever those ambitions might be. Gemini. This new moon is kind of misleading. I mean, from your perspective, it doesn't necessarily finish in the way it starts. And if we look at this new moon, in its sort of raw form, well, it's at the end of Capricorn, and Capricorn and Gemini are two signs which don't necessarily get on well with each other. Not necessarily. I mean, they're very different signs, Gemini and Capricorn. Gemini is an air sign, it's mutable. Capricorn is obviously an earth sign, it's cardinal. And so this new moon might, to begin with, be unsettling. You look at things and you're thinking that this is not necessarily straightforward. And when you look at the future, you see complications. And you're right to see complications, because the world is complicated. You cannot judge things in terms of what they look like on the surface. I mean, Geminis in a way would like to do that. You want some kind of simplicity here, and this is especially the case if you're dealing with emotion. Gemini is not, all things being equal, the most emotional of the 12 signs, and this new moon really does reinforce the fact that things can be complicated. Things can be very complicated, and if you try to make things simple, or if you just behave as if everything is simple and straightforward, it's not necessarily going to work. And so if you take an approach which is, ever so slightly suspicious, you don't necessarily take what people say at face value. I think that's the right way of dealing with this new moon. And at the same time, it's important, not to be too close-minded. You have to be aware of how misleading things can be. But in the run-up to the new moon, we do have a square to Chiron, and Mercury is making a square to Chiron. And so I think in some respects this Mercury square Chiron could colour the experience of the new moon. And so Mercury square Chiron might be about you being challenged. Mercury is in Capricorn, so Mercury perhaps at the moment likes things to be straightforward. You, Gemini, would like things to be straightforward. I mean, I'm not saying that's the way it always is, but while Mercury is in Capricorn, you want things as far as possible to follow a particular plan, and maybe you're perhaps being a little more sort of materialistic than usual, and you're trying to keep it simple, and perhaps move forward in solid step. But that square to Chiron is kind of agitating you. It's something you have to think about, and something is just bothering you, and it might be quite moral. You think you think about something you do, and you think, okay, it's fine, I'll just move on. I'll keep walking on, and I'm not going to bother about it. But then something is bothering you. I can remember, God, quite a long time ago. I remember I was about to cross a street. It was a really busy street, and there was this old woman who was completely overwhelmed by the traffic, and she couldn't cross the street. I mean, she just was totally couldn't handle it. Anyway, I just walked on, and I walked on for 5 minutes, and then I just kept thinking about this woman. And I'm thinking, God, I shouldn't have just walked. I walked right past her. I didn't help her. Then after 5 minutes, I finally went back, and she was still there. And so I was in a foreign country, so I didn't speak her language, but I was able to get her across the road. I'm not singing my own praises here. It's just it's just obvious, and it's kind of like that. And it's actually quite a Gemini thing. Gemini is not necessarily an immediately moral sign. It sort of thinks about one thing, thinks about another thing. But so it takes Gemini a long time to be moral. And sometimes, sometimes it takes a long time. It can take minutes. It can take a lifetime. It can take years and years to think about what the right thing to do is. And maybe that's what this Mercury square Chiron is. Perhaps you have the time to think about what you're doing, and there may be a few sort of moral regrets, and perhaps it's like the difference between the Titanic and the Lusitania. Those two ships that went down. It's quite interesting when you look at the people who went down with those two ships. That on the Titanic, the famous thing about how more women were saved than men, women and children first, because the Titanic took a long time to go down, and so some people perhaps they started off thinking about saving themselves, but they had an hour to think about it, and so things were more orderly. On the Lusitania, which was this ship was torpedoed by the Germans in, was it 1916, something like that, or was it 1917? One of the two. It's a thing that got America into war. But the thing is, Lusitania went down quickly, and if you look at women and children, women in terms of survivability in the Lusitania didn't have much of an advantage, and the reason is the ship went down quickly, and there was no time for perhaps Geminis on board the Lusitania or anyone else to think about what is the right thing to do, and that can be a Gemini thing, and Gemini's relationship to morality. It can just take a long time to work its way through. You get there in the end. But you're not going to be able to do it if you've got 1 minute to make a decision, to make a moral decision. You might just sort of put yourself first. And so going back to this Mercury square Chiron, something is bothering you. Something is trying to bother you. And it's saying, no, it's not as simple as that. You do need to have a broader perspective, and you perhaps need to think about society at large, and you have to behave properly and morally. So that may be an aspect of this new moon, because that Mercury square Chiron is taking place in the run-up to this to the new moon. So the new moon, Gemini, could potentially start off as being quite complicated, but it is likely to morph, because this new moon is late, very late in Capricorn. That's why with this new moon, I'm thinking it has more of the qualities of a full moon, because it's so late in the sign. And so you start off by thinking about the past and the complications of the past, and that might well have a financial side to it all. A financial side to it. Thinking about financial complications, and just everything looks difficult. But then the sun and the moon, well, certainly the moon first, moves into Aquarius. And so it starts off as being a Capricorn new moon, and then it ends up being an Aquarian new moon. And that's completely different, because, Aquarius is an air sign. Aquarius is a sign that really has a natural affinity with Gemini. And so over the next few days, as you move into next week, as you sort of move beyond the 18th of February, you move beyond that, you start to see things. You start to see things in a different way, and you start to see possibilities. Possibilities which hadn't been there before. Perhaps some Geminis had limited themselves, and they'd become quite negative. They thought, well, there might have been a feeling that there was a sort of decreasing optionality, fewer options. Your choices were getting diminished. But now, with the moon moving into Aquarius, and a load of other stuff moving into Aquarius. Remember, Venus moves into Aquarius over the weekend. So with this growing Aquarius emphasis, we can start to reframe this new beginning. It might actually be a genuine new beginning, where you can start to think about everything that is possible. And eventually, pretty soon, in fact, Mercury will move into Aquarius, and so as Capricorn changes to Aquarius, as those planets move out of Capricorn, you start to see that many things are possible, and you're able to get a new perspective, and it's a new perspective, which allows you to think that really anything is possible. You thought that you had no possibilities at the time of a new moon, but it changes, and you may feel that you need to sort of explore something new, or you may be thinking about other countries, where you want to go to. By the way, don't just go somewhere for the sake of it. As you know, if you've been watching my videos for long enough, I kind of feel a moral obligation. I mean, talking about moral obligations, I feel a moral obligation to discourage people to just travel for the sake of it. I mean, not that anyone's going to listen to me, but you've got to think about the environment, and just travel for the sake of it. Well, didn't someone say that traveling narrows the mind? Because of course, might not seem obvious, but it can narrow the mind, because you travel somewhere, particularly if you travel somewhere for a short period of time, it can just confirm your prejudices rather than give you anything new. So you don't need to necessarily answer this Aquarian call by traveling to the other side of the world. What you need is just perhaps as someone said, you need a new pair of eyes. That's what's needed. So it's not about making a big change. It's just, what was it? Who said it? It was some French writer. Proust, wasn't it? You need a new set of eyes. With a new set of eyes, everything changes. And that's perhaps what you need to be doing. And with all those planets in Aquarius, you might realize that you don't have to go anywhere to have a change. And that's perhaps how this new moon progresses. Things start off as being very complicated. You start off as not being able to see anything, and then when the planets move into Aquarius, Gemini, everything is really clear, and it's because you've changed the way you see things. It's not because you've traveled to the other side of the world. Cancer. Lunations are always important for Cancerians. It is the whole lunation cycle, and new moons, full moons, first quarter moons, last quarter moons. It can all have an impact on Cancerians, and with this new moon taking place in Capricorn, which is your opposite sign, you might sort of immediately think that this is about other people. I mean, it is a relationship new moon, and this is what astrologers are going to say. I think what they might say. Well, new moon, new beginning, new relationship. And that might well be how it is. I mean, but of course, I don't want to get anyone's hopes up. If you're looking for a new relationship, you can see it in theory with this new moon in Capricorn in your opposite sign. But is it really going to work out like that? And it may also say something about existing relationships. And we shouldn't forget that this new moon takes place right at the end of Capricorn. It takes place at 2844 Capricorn. So I would argue that this new moon has a full moon dimension to it, because it's very late in the sign. Of course, it's not a full moon, but it might sometimes feel like a full moon. And so, in terms of relationships, this new moon might represent a new phase within a particular relationship. So, this relationship, it can be anything, needn't be romantic, needn't be, with a spouse. It can be something, not quite so long lasting, but it's just an awareness of how you and another person, get on with each other, and what the dynamic is. And perhaps with this new moon, it represents a time where you start to see someone, in a new way, and you're finally becoming sort of realistic. And in the recent past, it might have been difficult to understand what was going on, but now it's clear, and it will become particularly clear once the moon changes sign, because at the precise moment of the new moon, this new moon taking place this new moon is I've set this for 7:52 p.m. Westminster, this chart you're looking at. So if you look at this new moon, whenever it happens, whenever it happens, the moon is conjunct the sun. And that means that the moon is combust. So the precise moment of a new moon just can be a moment where you can't see anything. Instead, it's just a beginning. And things only perhaps become clear once the sun and the moon are in different signs. When you've got the sun in Capricorn and the moon in Aquarius, when that happens, there is a feeling of objectivity. The moon is no longer combust, and at that stage, things become clear, and it becomes clear, I think, at quite an emotional level. When the moon moves into Aquarius, you just have a deep feeling about what another person is like, and you just know. You don't have to explain it. You just know it. You feel it, and it's obvious. So, Cancer, if you are trying to make your mind up about someone, then I do think that this new moon is going to be helpful. And and as the new moon progresses, because this new moon, it starts in Capricorn, but it ends in Aquarius. You're able to get into the matter sort of more and more sort of deeply, and there can be just a fundamental understanding. And another thing about the new moon is that it's trine Uranus, so it's also sextile Saturn, so that does colour this new moon and what the new moon is about. And you could say new moon trine Uranus. It could represent a surprise, not just a surprise on the day of the new moon, but if you look at the couple of weeks following the new moon, then there is a sense of just understanding. And I'm not just talking about one-to-one relationships. It's just about people in general, because people are difficult to work out, and you mustn't assume that it's just immediately obvious, but there just be moments where it just becomes clear. And once you realize something, you can't unrealize it. You've got the information, you've had the inspiration, and then you need to act on it. But you should act on it. And I mean, that is an important point to make about people, is that just because we know that a person has a particular character traits, a particular moral direction. Just because we know all this, just because we know what someone is like, doesn't necessarily mean we act on it. We may just do nothing because sometimes it's just easiest to maintain the status quo. We just continue with particular relationships and we just we ignore what we know. So the new moon doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a change. But the question is, what are you going to do with the knowledge that you have? Now, that might seem negative, more about the right thing to do being to perhaps end a relationship, but it can work the other way. It might be that that someone is good for you, and that if you gave them a chance, they could really help you out. But you might still do nothing because perhaps because it's too complicated. And overall, as these planets move into Aquarius, and it kind of you have a Capricorn new moon that becomes an Aquarius new moon. As you get this growing Aquarius emphasis, you might feel that it is a bit over your head, that you're dealing with what people are really like, and also you're dealing with your response, and your response may not be particularly easy to define, and there are maybe things you don't really want to explain, but Cancer, you know what's right. Or more importantly, you feel what is right, and I think that is an important part of what the new moon is about. And we can also get psychological about this new moon. I mean, we can get super psychological about it. This new moon taking place in your opposite sign, arguably in a part of your horoscope that you are least aware of. And there's going to be a lot of stuff in Capricorn over the weekend. There is a time over the weekend in a run up to the new moon, of course, where we got 5 planets in Capricorn. But still, by the end of the weekend, we've still got 4 planets in Capricorn. And so if you find yourself responding strongly to another person, or indeed another situation, it's possible, Cancer, that you are almost sort of responding strongly to yourself, because you are seeing in other people an aspect of yourself that you don't fully want to recognize. Maybe it's just too complicated, or it seems too complicated on the surface, but maybe we're talking about something that does need to be integrated, that's something you've been missing out on. And now you have a chance to understand what it is. Okay, you've got to be honest with yourself. You've got to have self-awareness. But if you can be self-aware, then I think that this new moon can really represent a key moment. Remembering this new moon is trine Uranus. Suddenly something makes sense, something can make sense, and Cancer, you start to be aware of what it is possible and how you can achieve your potential. Leo, new moon is it's relevant to you. I mean, this new moon is relevant to everyone, but we shouldn't forget that a new moon is a conjunction between the moon and the sun. And so, the sun is your ruler. And so if the moon is conjunct the sun, you've got to feel something. And as far as this new moon is concerned, I think you're starting to think about, what actually do you need to do? And it's perhaps a culmination. Perhaps since maybe the end of December, since Christmas, you've been looking at your life, how you've been organizing your life, how you've been running it, and what choices you've made. And it hasn't always been easy, and you may be feeling that you haven't necessarily made much progress. and that might be bothering you. But with the new moon, it becomes clear what you have and what you haven't done. There's no point in sort of beating yourself up about what hasn't been done. I mean, what's happened has happened. What has not happened has not happened. That's just the way it is. And you look back on the past and you're thinking, well, you've got a long way to go. I mean, that might be how you feel. But when you feel something, perhaps even when you feel a bit guilty about something, it means that something is going on. You understand the need for change, and at the same time, you might realize that the last month hasn't necessarily been quite as wasted as it seems to be on the surface. You have covered a fair amount of ground, and you can cover ground in many different ways. It's not just about being material, thinking about the material world, what the material world it is all about, and what you've cleared up, what you haven't cleared up. It's also about your thoughts, because when you think about concepts of disorganization and untidiness, I'm not saying you're untidy or disorganized. When you think about these kind of concepts, they often relate to the mind, and one's external environment is a reflection of one's mind. And if changes are taking place in your mind, and in your mind things are becoming clearer, then inevitably that will be reflected in your external environment. And this new moon is also trine Uranus. I think that is really relevant, the fact that this new moon is trine Uranus. Uranus is in Taurus. It's it's quite a high profile sign for Uranus to be in. I mean, from a Leo perspective, Taurus is the sign immediately sort of above you. It's a sign that in the Taurian chart is connected with ambition and career and direction. And so with new moon trine Uranus, you're starting to think about what needs to be done in order for you to achieve your aims. And you can have all the aims you like, but if things are not organized at ground level, then things might not happen. And in order for them to be organized at ground level, your own mind has to be organized. So it's kind of a process which this new moon is talking about. It starts with your mind and your perceptions, and perhaps even how you're organizing your thoughts. And then it moves to the next stage, which is your immediate environment, where you are existing, where you are living. And then you move on to the wider world, the world where people have ambitions, where there's competition, where you're maybe competing with other people for attention and for rewards, or perhaps jobs, depending on your circumstances. And so it's just a natural flow. And if you can sort things out on a mental level, which I think you can, I think you are sorting it out, then you can be well pleased with the eventual results. And while we're on the subject of Capricorn and what Capricorn means for the average Leo, there is a health dimension. And I'm not in the business of saying anything about the medical side of things. I'm not a medical astrologer. I'm not qualified to talk about that. And as I always like to say when talking about health, I'm fundamentally talking about lifestyle. And over the last month, with all these planets in Capricorn, there is a time over the weekend, on certainly on Friday, Friday the 16th, when we do have 5 planets in Capricorn, 5 personal planets in Capricorn, and that gives you an opportunity to really get insights about your health and well-being. I don't know how healthy you feel, but I suspect, Leo, that at some level you could be better. you could be healthier. I mean, I'm not just talking about physical health. I'm talking about, psychological health, spiritual health, and it's perhaps all about doing the right things, doing the wrong things, not doing the wrong things, and with this new moon in Capricorn, you might sort of be looking back at the past, looking at what you've done, what you haven't been doing, and really getting some insights about what you've been doing wrong. And again, I'm not telling you you've been doing anything wrong. You might feel you've been doing something wrong, or you might feel that there's something you should have been doing. I don't know, whether it's exercise, diet, whatever. But you do have a chance to get it together. Of course, you might need some medical advice on this. I'm not here to give medical advice, as I've just said. But I think from a health perspective, you do seem to know what you need to do. And I think that the new moon, is going to help you, in this direction. Now, when we're talking about this new moon, it is in very late. It's very, very late in Capricorn, and the next full moon is in Leo. It's in your sign. So on the 1st of February, we have the moon in Leo, sun in Aquarius. So, it starts as being a Capricorn new moon, but in a way it ends as an Aquarius new moon. And so that may say something, not just about how you're organizing yourself, at whatever level, but it may also say something about other people. And perhaps at some level you've been organizing yourself and trying to work things out in order that you might come across to other people in a different way. And maybe that says something about how relationships are working. Relationships do perhaps need a certain level of organization. So perhaps you've been kind of preparing the ground for some kind of change in a relationship. I mean, it could be a new relationship. And don't forget that at the time of the new moon, Venus is moving into Aquarius. And then after that, you're going to have the sun and the moon in Aquarius. So it's going to end up as an Aquarius new moon, even though it starts as a Capricorn new moon. And of course, Aquarius is your opposite sign. And that might say a great deal about relationships. And perhaps it's a new beginning, and perhaps it's a new beginning based on your capacity to just organize yourself, make sure that you are in good shape, and also to make sure that you know who you are and you know what you want. And that might require organization, and perhaps you have to sort out a lot of clutter, but then things do become easier. So don't forget the social dimension of it. So it's a lot going on with this new moon, and I think that it does start with you. That's the important point. It starts with your own brain, the way you are sorting out your ideas, and once you've understood that, you can address your immediate environment and then the wider social environment. So there's a lot to do, and I think that there is a lot that you can do. Virgo. Virgo is, of course, an earth sign, and so you appreciate it when there are a lot of planets in earth signs, and that's what we've got. Certainly, in the run-up to the new moon, on Friday, we got the moon moving into Capricorn, and so moon moving into Capricorn, that is the beginning of the new moon. When I say Friday, I'm talking about Friday the 16th. So we got all five personal planets in Capricorn, and from a Virgo perspective, that's pretty good. I mean, Capricorn is a sign that does resonate with you. I mean, Capricorn is a sign which is about being grounded, but also having a strong sense of who you are, and what you can do, and in particular, what you can do well. And I think that really is important. You shouldn't just do things just to be helpful. Virgo has perhaps a reputation for being helpful. Good old Virgo, always there to maybe, I don't know, organize things, clean things up. You can read all the stereotypical views of Virgo, but it needs to go a bit beyond that, because what's important is you. You are not leading your life for other people. You're leading your life for yourself first of all, because fundamentally you can't help anyone if you are not being true to yourself. And all of these Capricorn planets, which have been it's been building up since the end of last year. All these Capricorn planets are really telling you that you've got to put yourself first, because that's what is required. That's what is needed. And you may have to at times make a fuss. At the beginning of a new moon, if we look at the new moon as a broad period of days, and I would regard the moon going into Capricorn on Friday the 16th, as the beginning of a new moon. At the beginning of a new moon, we have Mercury, which is your ruler, making a square to Chiron. And that Mercury square Chiron is asking you to be different. Not different just for the sake of it. It's instead about understanding what your role is and how you do things differently, and if necessary, being prepared to make a fuss, because individuality and expressing one's individuality is not always easy. You have to sometimes run into conflict. You have to be ready to upset people. I mean, I'm not saying people are going to be upset, but you cannot just just follow anyone else's lead with Mercury square Chiron. And it's not just about Mercury square Chiron. It's about all those planets in Capricorn. It's about you, being true to yourself. And with this new moon, when a new moon comes about on Sunday, with this new moon, you can sort of look back at the past. And I think there is a strong element to this new moon, which is about looking at the past, asking yourself, what have you accomplished so far? So with this new moon, you can perhaps evaluate how much you have achieved, to what extent you have allowed yourself to be an individual. At times you may not have always been successful. It might not have felt that you were successful, but because you are aware of who you are and what you can do, you can now fill in the gaps. And so with the new moon, it's perhaps a time to rededicate yourself to something very particular, which is about you. I mean, and that is the important point. And in the end, with this new moon in late Capricorn, it's making a trine to it's making this trine to Uranus, and that new moon trine Uranus is really inspirational because it affects Virgo. You've got new moon in Capricorn, Uranus in Taurus, and then you've got Virgo is the sign that gets the trine, and it makes sense. And it makes sense that you have got something to do which is original, unique, and it may well be disruptive, and that might say something about how the next couple of weeks progress. And so having understood who you are and what you can do, then your job is to organize everything around it. Things have to fit in with you. It's not about you fitting in with other people. And, that doesn't mean that you need to be obnoxious or opinionated or throw your weight around. That's not what it's about. You just have a vision about what you can do. And now you need to just create a world which is just accepting, that accepts you as you are. And in the process, it's not a time to compromise. It is a time to be different. That Mercury square Chiron, I know it happened on Friday. You could argue that it's a one-off event, but it persists in a way through the next fortnight, maybe even longer, well into February. And so you can be unique, you can be disruptive, perhaps, if you need to be disruptive, but, all the while you're being very clear about what you can do and what you won't do. And if you can make that distinction, I think, this new moon, I think, can be a real positive for you. Libra. We have a new moon, and I think in some respects this new moon could be misleading, or at least confusing in terms of what it actually means. This new moon is in late Capricorn, and as far as Libra is concerned, that might seem rather tedious, actually. Having a new moon in Capricorn, it just kind of reflects the way things have always been, and you may be tempted to just stick to what you know, and not to do anything unusual. And if you can be happy and secure and grounded, that's what it's all about. So that is the initial impression. And some Librans with this new moon, they might be thinking about their home. I mean, we've got 4, even 5 planets in Capricorn. So on Friday, when this new moon starts, when the moon moves into Capricorn, we've got all the personal planets in Capricorn. And remember, Capricorn as a sign is right at the bottom of your chart, and it is connected with the home. And so you might want to put a lot of emphasis on your home and on your family, on whatever makes you feel secure. And so this means, Libra, that if you have anything to do with real estate or property, it could take up a lot of your time, and indeed you may want it to take up a lot of your time. And perhaps there's a lot you can get together. It doesn't really matter what the situation is, or your home, whether it's your home, whether you rent a home, doesn't matter how big the home, how small it is. It's something that you do need to think about. Now, this new moon, it takes place very late in Capricorn, and I have titled this video "Final New Moon, Final Reckoning." Perhaps I was just being a bit pompous there. Maybe I should have gone for something a bit low key. But what I mean by final reckoning is sort of looking back at the way things have been, at the way things have unfolded. I don't think that this new moon is entirely forward-thinking. I mean, you'd expect new moons to be forward-thinking, but I don't think this new moon, not particularly. It is about the past and what you've done in the past, and perhaps you're looking back at not just the last few weeks, but perhaps years, decades. You may be looking back, and things that happened in the distant past may be really weighing in on you, and perhaps your memories at the moment are quite strong, and you're thinking about what happened, and it's often the case that something that happened decades ago, we kind of replay it in our mind, and this might sound rather negative. By negative, I don't mean necessarily bad, but just quite a passive process. But I said at the beginning of this piece that this new moon was misleading. And the thing about this new moon is that it doesn't end how it starts. So this new moon happens right at the end of Capricorn. And so what happens is the new moon happens and then the moon changes sign. Almost immediately after the moon moves into Aquarius. And then the sun moves into Aquarius. So it starts as a Capricorn new moon and it ends as an Aquarius new moon. And if we're talking about Aquarius, well, that's a very different energy, particularly from a Libra perspective. Aquarius, is a sign, it's an air sign. It's a sign that you're comfortable with, and it's a sign which is, about, what you can do, what you can achieve, and what you can enjoy. And it's not just the fact that we've got the sun and the moon moving into Aquarius. We've got Venus moves into Aquarius. Over the weekend, Venus moves into Aquarius. Indeed, at the time of a new moon, Venus, your ruler, is in Aquarius. So we're starting to see a change. So, it kind of starts with you perhaps being quite introspective, thinking about the past, being very focused on your home and family, perhaps. But then, as planets move into Aquarius, as the sun, moon, Venus moves into Aquarius, you kind of start to brighten up. You have a greater sense of who you are and what you can do, and things that might have seemed dangerous or something you just wanted to avoid might suddenly have a new interest, and you might have a chance to really tune into your own potential and start to enjoy the first fruits of Aquarius season. And so, things are rooted in the past. That's true. I mean, a new moon is the very beginning of things. And so it's good in a way that you have this groundedness. I think the new moon does ground you. And I think that's something very important about it, having this grounding impact. And also, this new moon is quite close to the conjunction of Mars and a trine of Uranus. So Mars and Uranus, they're quite assertive planets, and you can be grounded and also quite independent-minded. Yeah, that's always important for a Libran. Librans can sometimes be, too willing to compromise and to listen to other perspectives and try to fit in. But no, I think perhaps that's the real benefits of having all those planets in Capricorn. You have been able to root yourself. But now that you're feeling more confident, you're feeling that you're in control, now you can handle being yourself, perhaps on a more public stage. I mean, I'm not saying you have to be in the center of things, but you can start to be yourself and be honest about being yourself and not have to apologize. And, over the next couple of weeks, as planets move into Aquarius, you're starting to feel really quite good about yourself. And you realize, Libra, that there are just so many things that you can accomplish. And, additionally, you're starting to tune into the fact that Pluto is in Aquarius. Okay, I know that Pluto's been in Aquarius for a long time, but, sometimes you forget it. And Pluto in Aquarius is about you creating change and transformation through your own fundamental creativity. Scorpio. This new moon, it certainly starts in Capricorn and ends in Aquarius. Now that might sound strange, but this new moon, is at what, 28:44 Capricorn, right at the end of the sign, and then these two planets move into Aquarius. So there is an Aquarius feel to this new moon in the end. It might not seem to be sort of obvious, at the time. So as far as the immediate impact of this new moon, well, it's quite an intense new moon for you because, it is trine Uranus and it is conjunct Mars. So this might be about might well be about, other people. Other people have a dimension here. I mean, after all, Uranus, remember, is in Taurus. It's in your opposite sign, and so with New Moon trine Uranus, there might be interactions with other people. That is certainly a way of looking at it. I mean, you're able to communicate very well at the moment, and you can communicate with power and intensity. Don't forget, this new moon is not just trine Uranus, but it's conjunct Mars, it's conjunct Mercury. In fact, at the same time as this new moon, there is a conjunction between Mercury and Mars. Now, that is relevant. So if you're trying to make sense of a new moon, what does a new moon mean? You look at everything that's happening at the precise moment of the new moon. And one thing that's happening at the precise moment of the new moon, is a conjunction with Mercury and Mars. So this new moon is certainly going to enable you to communicate with power and conviction, and, if necessary, anger. And you're going to be helped by that Uranus. But you might also be provoked by this Uranus as well. Uranus in your opposite sign of Taurus, there could be people, there could be situations that just stir you up. So, if you find yourself getting annoyed about something, well, you ask yourself, what is going on? Why are you feeling annoyed? What actually has stirred you into action? And, you can certainly have a huge impact. But how far do you want to take things? I mean, that is a question that you have to consider. Scorpio, you are powerful. You really are. Especially Mars in Capricorn. Mars is exalted in Capricorn. You really can project yourself very well. But just because you have that power doesn't necessarily mean that you should use that power. And in the end, you might decide that you want to keep it to yourself. And I said that this new moon, it starts in Capricorn, but then it kind of moves into Aquarius, because the moment the new moon happens, the sun and the moon, they change sign. They both go into Aquarius. They go into a fixed sign, and they make a conjunction to Pluto. In fact, Venus is already in Aquarius at the time of this new moon. So there is a growing Aquarius emphasis. Well, it's the end of the Capricorn. Well, it's the beginning of the end of the Capricorn season, and then we get this huge Aquarius concentration forming, and it might be that you don't necessarily want to talk, argue, make a fuss. Instead, you just want to stick to what you have developed already, and not take risks, and just build up what you have. And so we might be starting a process of consolidation, and consolidation can be very important in the life of a Scorpio. You know how much things can change, and it's always, or very often, about drama. And we can think about all the imagery with Scorpio and change, like the snakes shedding its skin and so on. And so with these planets moving into Aquarius, and maybe even over the next fortnight, Scorpio, you just might feel that you need to just take a back seat, not feel that you have to be in the center of things, and just enjoy your own security and the things that make you feel comfortable. For example, your home and your family, and just building up what you have. And so you start this new moon, your mind going everywhere. You're ready to do this, you're ready to say this, you're ready to get annoyed, whatever it is. But then, as soon as the new moon is over, you're thinking, well, yeah, you know all this, but does anyone else need to know? do you really need to bother yourself by just interacting in a sort of vigorous or angry way? Probably not. And it might just be best if you just relax for a bit. And maybe this is a lot about what the Aquarius season is, because this new moon, it ends in Aquarius, and certainly for the next couple of weeks until the end of the month. I think February the 1st might see a change, because February the 1st we see a full moon in Leo, and with that February the 1st full moon, there might be an important challenge here. You might have sort of built yourself up to a certain point, and you've been sort of very comfortable, or you started to make yourself feel comfortable, and then something happens, or something tries to communicate with you and say, well, okay, you've built yourself up to a certain level, now what are you going to do? And so on February the 1st, or around then, with the full moon, there is a challenge, and perhaps you have to make some effort to interact and project whatever it is that you've been building up. But we'll be talking about that nearer the time. Sagittarius. I can't help talking about money. One has to think about money with this new moon, and the reason being that we've got a lot of planets in Capricorn. I mean, on Friday, when the moon moves into Capricorn, you got there are actually 5 planets in this sign, and the new moon when a new moon happens, that's in Capricorn. And okay, Venus will have moved into Aquarius by then, but this new moon may say something about your relationship to money, and it could be, in a way, a new beginning, but it might also be about a reflection. You thinking about the past, and what you've done with money, what you have done with your resources, and perhaps you will start to see some of the consequences. I did title this video rather grandiosely "Final Reckoning." I don't mean it in such a way. That is a bit of an exaggeration, but it's still being aware of what has happened with money in the past. Not necessarily just what you have done with money, perhaps what other people have done with money, and starting to see the consequences of those actions, for better or for worse. And that might be what the new moon is about. This new moon is very late into Capricorn, and as I say, and it's been saying in several places in this video, I do think that this new moon has some of the qualities of a full moon, because it is so late in Capricorn, and you start to see things, as they really are, for better or for worse. And so you have the opportunity to understand money like never before, understand your own finances like never before, and perhaps also to understand other people's money as well. And this new moon additionally is trine Uranus. So trine Uranus, with Uranus there is a possibility of a surprise. But it's Uranus in Taurus. It's not like a thunderbolt surprise. It's just you look at the facts of matter, the numbers, the figures, you do your calculations, and suddenly it becomes clear. It becomes clear what has been done in the past. The consequences of it all become clear. And if you're honest with yourself, your financial position becomes clear. And I do not necessarily mean that in a bad sense. It's just about being honest about what you have and what you don't have, what your resources are, and that, to an extent, is going to reflect your behavior, what you can do, what you can't do. With this new moon, it might be a good time to be cutting down on expenditure. Maybe you've agreed to do something which is of a financial nature, and you might think, "Oh, no, you don't really need to do that," because everything is clear, and it can be clear. And okay, this is perhaps not what Sagittarius wants to hear, but you just cannot avoid, that Capricorn emphasis and the materialism of Capricorn. But it's not all about money. And the sun and the moon, they are moving into Aquarius. And in fact, a load of planets are moving into Aquarius. So, this new moon does have an Aquarian feel to it, because the new moon becomes kind of like an Aquarius new moon, and the full moon on 1st of February is in Leo. You've got moon in Leo, sun in Aquarius, and so with all this Aquarius emphasis, it's perhaps time to be thinking, researching, talking, communicating. And what about? Maybe it's about money. maybe you've had insights about your finances, and now you want to act on those insights. And so there is a lot to do, a lot to think about, a lot to talk about, a lot to perhaps read, and it just could be just a wider process of understanding something. And even if we take the money aside, I think it needn't be just about money. It could be just about understanding your world, and asking questions in a way that is fearless and objective. Sagittarius, your sign is connected with the truth. Truth is very important to the average Sagittarian, and the truth, it's not just your truth. There is an objective truth there. And if you can be objective with this new moon, and again, I'm not just talking about over the next few days, over the next couple of weeks, if you can just be objective, accept the facts as they are. So if you ask a question, you must be ready to receive an honest answer. So you receive an honest answer, and you should be happy. Okay, you might not be happy, but if you know the truth, then you're in a position to make changes, make plans, and in the end to give yourself a high level of security. Now that might not happen immediately, but perhaps we're thinking further ahead, to the next new moon, which will of course happen at the end of Aquarius, and then we've got stuff moving into Pisces, and so Pisces is of course an important sign in your chart, particularly now when Saturn is in Pisces. But we're running ahead of ourselves here. I mean, I think fundamentally this new moon for you, is about understanding and thinking, and to keep it to, okay, I'm going to make sort of one very sort of down to earth very comment about it. When I say down to earth, it's just the sort of the here and now. It could be about transport. There could be a transport element to this new moon in the end, when those planets move into Aquarius, and perhaps it's time to think about how you are traveling, how you are moving from place to place, and perhaps also about your relationship to your car, if you have a car. I mean, I know you might not have a car, or perhaps your relationship to your transport or to bicycle or whatever. But if you happen to be planning on making changes to your car, or getting a new car, or whatever you're doing with cars, then a lot of research and a lot of questions need to be asked. And don't rush into making transport decisions, whether it's about a car, a bicycle, about anything. You need to really satisfy yourself that you really do have the solution. And that also applies to planning trips. So if you're planning a trip, if you're planning a journey, particularly a short journey, you need to think about how you are doing it. I mean, I know that sounds a bit too everyday and boring, but that might be an element of this new moon in the end, once the sun and the moon move into Aquarius. Capricorn. It is the Capricorn New Moon coming up on Sunday the 18th, when the sun and the moon are both in your sign. And in fact, just before the new moon, we're going to have 5 planets in Capricorn. So one concept I've sort of mentioned in this video is the idea that the new moon actually starts on Friday. It starts when the moon moves into your sign, when the moon moves into Capricorn, because the definition of a new moon is, of course, when the sun and the moon are both in the same sign. So that's what happens when the moon moves into Capricorn. And on Friday, you've got 5 planets in your sign. Okay, Venus does move out of Capricorn over the weekend and move into Aquarius. But with these 5 planets in your sign, or okay, maybe it's only 4, you certainly have a lot of power at your disposal. There are a lot of things. There are a lot of things you can do, and you can really, really project yourself with this new moon. It is very much your new moon. Okay, you get a Capricorn new moon, every year, and this is your new moon, and so you can be powerful, and you can be disruptive if you want, because this new moon is, after all, trine Uranus. So the new moon is at 28:44 Capricorn. It's trine Uranus, which is 27:34 Taurus. And so if you want, you do have the ability to really get noticed. And perhaps it's the culmination of a lot of things. And that is the nature of this particular new moon. The fact that this new moon happens very late in the sign. I think that this new moon is, to an extent, rather sort of backward looking. You're thinking about what has happened in the past, perhaps what has happened since the sun went into Capricorn, over the last months, maybe since Christmas. And you can see how much you have achieved, and you can also see where things might have been missing, where you haven't been so successful. So it's a reckoning. I mean, I'm not saying it's a devastating reckoning, but, as a Capricorn, you're someone who is quite realistic. You can be quite harsh on yourself. It's true. And where you've been lacking. I mean, don't beat yourself up about it. I mean, you can't be perfect, but the new moon shows perhaps what is left to do, and that's not a worry. I think that you have the capacity to make up for lost time, very quickly, and I think that you're going to be helped by the fact that this new moon, is trine Uranus, and the new moon trine Uranus is probably going to make you quite creative, inventive, and you can do things quickly. And additionally, this new moon is sextile Saturn. So there's another reason why this new moon really should work for you. You can really harness the energy of this new moon, and you can make things happen. And I think it's going to be very easy for you, to talk about your plans and your ideas, and to insist on getting feedback. And there is just overall something very impressive about you, and people really notice you, and your words have a powerful influence, and you seem to have your finger on the pulse. You really are at the center of things. So, do make the most of this new moon, and it is a new beginning, and of course it's in an earth sign, and there is a practicality, obviously, which of course reflects Capricorn's practicality. But it might be that what you are deciding now, perhaps at the time of a new moon, it represents the beginning of something else, because these Capricorn planets, particularly the Sun and Moon, they quickly they move into Aquarius, and in fact Venus is in Aquarius at the time of the new moon, and so with this growing Aquarius emphasis, you perhaps realize that there is something else that you need. You kind of know what you want with all of these planets in Capricorn, or while these planets were in Capricorn, and the new moon gives you that sense of what needs to be done. And now with these Aquarius planets, Aquarius is a planet following Capricorn, you can start to bring things together. Perhaps in quite a material sense. Maybe there are things you decide that you need to buy. I'm not saying you should just buy for the sake of it, but perhaps it's about sort of possessions. What possessions do you need to achieve whatever it is that you need to do? And being a Capricorn, I don't think you're going to be wasting money on things, and money may well matter with all these planets in Aquarius. You perhaps have insights about how money should be spent and what the role of money is. And with these planets in Aquarius, you're perhaps aware of how your finances have been influenced perhaps by other people, and there may then be an urge to be more in control. Aquarius is a sign which is often connected with independence, and so being independent about your money, not being reliant on another person, and also making sure that no one is reliant on you. And so that might be something that you want to think about, something that is really quite important to you. And at the same time, with this new moon, it may well have an impact on your sense of direction, and perhaps on your career, or if you have a business, on that, or if you're looking for a job, all of that. It could make a difference, and you might have a pretty clear idea about what you need and what you want, and this is something you can project very well, and you'll be helped by the fact that you've still got planets in Capricorn. Mars is in Capricorn, for example, so you project yourself very well, and it's clear that you're someone who is serious, who needs to be taken seriously, and you can be quite independent-minded. You can be particularly independent-minded, as I've just said, when it comes to money, but not necessarily just your money. It may be in terms of what you say, what you have to, or rather what you have to say about finance. So, for example, if your job has anything to do with finance or the handling of money, then I think you can be very effective, and you can come up with some really, really good ideas. Aquarius. Okay, this new moon is in Capricorn. So we've got a new moon in Capricorn. But in a way, this new moon is in Aquarius. And the reason I'm saying that is because this new moon takes place right at the end of Capricorn, 28 degrees, 44 minutes Capricorn. So the moment this new moon happens, the sun and the moon move into Aquarius. So it really starts to have an Aquarius feel to it. And the next full moon, which of course the full moon is prepared by the new moon, so we get a Capricorn new moon, but a Leo full moon. When I say Leo full moon, I'm talking about moon in Leo, sun in Aquarius. So we think about new moons as being about new beginnings, and maybe it is in the end a new beginning for you, although it might not feel like that at the time. So when that new moon happens, that precise moment that the new moon happens, it is in Aquarius. It is in Capricorn, and so you might not feel very much. It might just be something just in the background. You notice a few changes, or maybe you even feel a few changes, but it's nothing too serious. I mean, nothing too dramatic. But then, as time progresses, as you move into next week, as the sun and the moon move into Aquarius, Venus is already in Aquarius. It starts to occur to you that it really is an important new beginning, and you'll suddenly find that you're able to really present yourself very well. And it could be, Aquarius, that stuff has been sort of building up in the background. You've been having ideas. You haven't wanted to talk about these ideas. You might have, to an extent, been quite secretive. Again, it's all been building up, and you've been, waiting to present yourself, present whatever is on your mind, but you just haven't had the chance. And now, with planets about to move into Aquarius, you get your chance. And of course, the Aquarius season is unfolding, and it's happening quickly. Venus is in Venus, as I just said, is in Aquarius at the time of a new moon. Then the moon moves into Aquarius, then the Sun and Mercury, Mars, it's all coming your way, and it is the beginning of the Aquarius season. And Aquarius season, in general, it really is, a new beginning for you. And so I think there really is a huge amount to look forward to, with this new moon. And what it's all about will become clear at the time of the full moon on February the 1st. Or it may even happen earlier. It might happen at the time of the first quarter moon. The first quarter moon is in Libra, so that's when you'll have... is that right? No, first quarter moon. Sorry, first quarter moon will be in Taurus, and that's on the 25th of January. So, 25th of January, we'll have the Sun in Aquarius, and we will have the Moon in Taurus. So, probably by the time of the first quarter moon on the 25th, things are starting to make a lot of sense, and you know what it's all about. But to begin with, your experience on Sunday, when a new moon is exact, you might not be sure, but you'll still know that something is going on. This new moon is trine Uranus. It's pretty closely trine Uranus. And so, with this trine to Uranus, you can feel that something is changing. You can almost feel the ground shaking. Something's happening. I mean, I'm not saying the ground is shaking, but you feel that something has happened, and you're not quite sure what it is. And just to begin with, there just may be this moment of silence, where you're really trying to work it all out. And then, as the Sun and the Moon move into Aquarius, it starts to make sense, and you realize that all of your preparation, all of your thinking, it's all there for a purpose. And so, suddenly you become a lot more prominent, and people start to take notice of you, and you realize, or you're reminded that, hey, Pluto's in Aquarius. Pluto's been in Aquarius for a long time. Venus is making a conjunction to Pluto, and that's how it all feels. And you can be different, and you can be different in a way that is completely constructive. So I'm thinking, overall, this new moon, it starts quite strangely, and you're not quite sure what's going on. But as you move into that sort of last half of January, it really does make sense, and you really benefit as each planet moves into Aquarius. You get stronger and stronger, and you really are able to make the most of the power of this new moon. Pisces. So my job in this video is to go through all of the 12 signs and talk about how this new moon is going to affect each of the 12. And perhaps there is a pressure on me to be perhaps dramatic, or at least to suggest that the new moon is going to be consequential. Now, I do think that the new moon could be consequential for everyone, but as far as you're concerned, Pisces, I think, all things being equal, you may be impacted less by this full moon than, many of the other signs. I don't think that this need be a major event. Certainly if you don't want it to be a major event, it can probably be, almost ignored. I mean, I say the usual things about new moons. A new moon represents a new beginning, and you can sort of understand things in new ways, and that's true. But is it something that you absolutely have to worry about all the time, that you have to ask yourself, have you done enough? Are you meeting the challenge of a new moon? Probably not. So I don't necessarily obsess about the new moon. So as far as what this new moon might be about, I mean, it could say something about your social life, the people around you, and how you relate to them. I mean, I'm not necessarily talking about one-to-one relationships. I'm talking about just the people who are always around. And you've had since Christmas, we've had a lot of planets in Capricorn, and while those planets have been moving through Capricorn, there might have been different people to deal with, and as you have dealt with different people, you've formed impressions. Some people have been more helpful than others, and being a Pisces, you're quite sensitive. You've got powerful emotions. Maybe you've understood certain things about certain people, and you're in a better position to work out, for example, whether they can be trusted. And now this process is sort of coming to an end, and we have this new moon in late Pisces late Capricorn. I've said that this video, the title of this video, Final Reckoning. What kind of final reckoning might this be? Well, it might be a final reckoning in terms of looking at some of the people around you and asking yourself, well, do you need to have them in future? Are they necessary? And part of you is thinking, well, maybe not, or maybe, but you certainly need to streamline your social life and cut out the dead wood and all that kind of thing. And then this new moon, it moves out of Capricorn, so it's a new moon that kind of starts in Capricorn, and then it sort of ends in Aquarius, because the sun and the moon, having made the conjunction, they both move into Aquarius. And so while you've got these planets moving through Aquarius, over the next few weeks and perhaps and longer, it's perhaps a time for reflection. You're not going to have such a great need for social contact, to feel that you have to have people around you, that you perhaps have to spend time interacting, being on the phone, conversations, whatever. It's possibly not going to necessarily interest you, and you may instead feel that you need to sort of fall back on your own resources, and also think things through in your own way. And Venus is moving into Aquarius. It's not just that's the first. Venus moves into Aquarius, and Venus is a planet that I always think it has a certain sympathy with Pisces, because Venus is exalted in Pisces. And so with Venus moving into Aquarius, that really does say something about how you want to relate to the world, and perhaps you don't. Or at the very least, you want to really restrict your social life to very few people who you trust, people who respect your independence, and that just might be how it's working. I mean, on a sort of a higher level, it could be that over the last month, you have been thinking things through, and you've perhaps been asking yourself, what do you really want? It's not just about money or status. What do you really want? And you've been reaching some conclusions, and they might have been certainly interesting. They could have been troubling as well. And then you've got this new moon, which is a kind of a culmination of this process. And the new moon makes this trine to Uranus, and this new moon trine Uranus could have been like a moment of realization, or could be a moment of realization. And that may say something about what the new moon is really all about, realizing what it is that you want, and also realizing what it is that you don't want, in terms of, what your life is all about, how you would like to lead your life, not just for the next couple of weeks, but maybe for the next 5 years, 10 years. And that may have a big impact on you, may have a big impact on how you relate to other people, seeing, which people are useful, which people are supportive of your longer term goals. And now, between now and the sun moving into Pisces, perhaps, the sun is going to move into Pisces quite soon, next month, sort of middle end of February. It's towards the end of February, sun moves into Pisces, and so the Pisces season is not so far away, but between now and the end of February, you just might want to sort of realign yourself, and it might be the best way of handling this new moon. So that's it. That's what I've got to say about the 12 signs and this the new moon. And now I want to look at the I Ching, and I'm kind of sort of mixing the astrology and the I Ching to some extent, and possibly, I shouldn't do that. But I wanted to keep to this sort of broad sort of new moon theme. So I asked the question, what kind of change does the new moon represent for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 38, which is opposition. So, where is the change in opposition? What is this hexagram about? And it might be about how you are moving into this new moon. I mean, maybe it's not about the new moon. Maybe it's how you are moving into the weekend, how you're moving into the event that takes place on Sunday. What are you feeling? And so opposition may be that you feel that you and the rest of the world are somehow at odds with one another. Perhaps you have differences of opinion. You're just on a different wavelength. And, maybe there have been arguments in the past. Maybe there have been no arguments, but you still feel that your views, your opinions just are at odds with everyone else's. Or maybe they're at odds with you, but there's a lot of division around. And again, we don't really expect that with a new moon, but perhaps this supports what I've been saying about this new moon, that this new moon does have the feeling of a full moon because it's in very late degrees. And, it's additionally, it's trine Uranus, and Uranus is a very independent energy. So new moon trine Uranus is, we want to hold on to our independence. And if we are trying to hold on to our independence, how can we at the same time, get on with other people? And it's not just other people, it's about society at large. And we may feel that we are at odds with the society in which we're living. What the government is doing, what people are saying, our neighbours, our community, our city, it's just alienation. And, I'm not being personal here, I don't think. I'm just saying that this is just something about the way in which we're living and the way we feel. Now, we do have a moving line. And the fourth line moves. And the fourth line is actually pretty positive. It's saying that we start feeling we are isolated, but we find a kindred spirit. We're not quite as isolated as we think we are. And so perhaps with this new moon, we start to be aware of, what is possible. And remember, this new moon has two sides to it. There there is a backward-looking side and there is a forward-looking side. And the backward-looking side is just looking backwards and seeing how difficult everything is, how much division there is. Then the forward-looking side, this new moon right at the end of Capricorn does flip into Aquarius in the end. And if we're really positive about the sign Aquarius, there is perhaps a sense of ideas and ideas coming together. And with this fourth line moving, it seems that we can find people who actually are on our wavelength. It's not like everyone is on our wavelength. That's the world we're living in. But there are one or two people who are able to allow us to connect. Because if we feel that we are disconnected, it's natural to be introverted, to fall back on our own resources, to feel that there's really not much point in doing anything. That's how we would feel. But when we realize that there are people out there who are on our wavelength, not everyone is on our wavelength, then we can slowly become, more extroverted and more interactive. And that perhaps reflects the transition of this new moon. This new moon starts in Capricorn, but then both the sun and the moon move into Aquarius, a positive sign, a more dynamic sign from Capricorn. And so once we know that there are people out there who we can trust, then we can be sort of more forward thinking. And then because we've got a moving line, we move to a second hexagram, and the second hexagram is hexagram number 41, which is decrease. So, what does that mean, decrease? Decrease really means letting go of things. And perhaps with this new moon, remember this new moon is very much at the end of the sign. And perhaps what is holding us back and is making us feel rather alienated is that we've just got lots of stuff that's been building up. Okay, it might be physical stuff, things, but it might be ideas, perhaps even prejudices, and it's all been building up, and we've perhaps been hoarding things to a certain extent, and it's just become a bit too much. And what do we do? What do we need to do? Decrease. We need to let go of things. And it could be sort of like an early spring clean. Okay, I know if you're in the southern hemisphere, it's nowhere near the spring, but just clearing things out, clearing out our ideas, maybe just clearing out physical things that just aren't doing any good. They're just and these things are just like barricades. So we are perhaps barricaded by our own material. We can't see out of the windows because of all of this. But once we start getting rid of things, there is a sense of sacrifice. We don't want to get rid of it. But if we decrease, if we throw things out, if we throw our own ideas that have passed their sell-by date out, that creates a space. And that gives us a space to breathe, and perhaps it also gives us a space to look at the positive potential of this new moon. And again I go back to the idea that this new moon is very late in Capricorn. It is about the past. There is a backward looking side to this new moon, and it's all about perhaps accumulated garbage. And if we can get rid of this accumulated garbage, then we're ready to look at the forward-looking part of the new moon. So I think that is really fundamentally how this new moon may occur to us, at least from the I Ching's perspective. And now I want to look at the new moon, in some detail. Look at the new moon, about what it means for the world, and perhaps go into some detail that so far I haven't really been able to get into. So here's the chart of the new moon. Okay, I've set it for I've set it for London. There's no reason why I should set it for London, but I have done. So what are the main features of this new moon? Let's forget the angles at the moment. Just look at the aspects. I've already talked about some of the features of this new moon. And when we're talking about a new moon, it's not just aspects of a new moon. It's things happening at the same time as the new moon, because a new moon should be regarded as a gateway. Something has opened and it's flooding through into the mundane sphere. So, for example, whatever exact aspects you have at the new moon, whatever midpoint aspects, fixed stars, all of that, it has an impact on how we experience this new moon. And some of the obvious things about this new moon, well, we have to look at the aspects of this new moon. This new moon is trine Uranus. And so if it's trine Uranus, then that might indicate change, rebellion, awareness, both on a sort of a private and a collective level. So the new moon, we might finally understand things. We have the chance to understand things. But just because we see things clearly doesn't necessarily mean we're going to act on it, because people do hate change. They really do everything they can to avoid change. But if we see change, we see the possibility of change, we can make it a part of our daily routine. We can make it a part of our life. And this new moon is, of course, linked with Saturn. So Saturn is starting to make a sextile to Uranus, and the new moon is sextile Saturn, and it is trine Uranus. So that makes for a new moon which is about creating change, but also stabilizing that change. Because if we just have a revolution for the sake of it, you can have a revolution, but how long is it going to last? It's not going to last very long at all. And so Saturn really does fix the whole thing. But when you're dealing with Saturn Uranus, you're dealing with tension. There is a lot of tension here. Okay, it might be Saturn sextile Uranus, but it's still a tense aspect. We want change, but we're afraid of change. We want to overturn everything, but at the same time we're trying to create structures, and we're trying to destroy structures at the same time. And that can be very stressful. I think you would agree. And don't forget, with this new moon, fundamental thing about this new moon is that it's in late degrees, and this is part of the reason why I'm saying it might be a final reckoning. It's very past looking. What has happened in the past, and what are the consequences of the past. And new moon trine Uranus might say that something has to break. We see a trine as being a fortunate aspect. Easy to see a trine as a fortunate aspect, or says good, but it's just an aspect. It's an aspect that's easy to manifest. So Uranus can be a very disruptive force that just manifests. It happens. And so this new moon might be about a change that just happens too quickly, too easily. And we might be, potentially, overwhelmed by this change. Okay, maybe not us, as individuals, we have choices, but, in terms of the world, how does the world relate to it? How do governments, politicians relate to it? It's very easy for things to get out of hand with this new moon trine Uranus, because things have built up. They've been building up, and now we have to relate to the past, and that the past is just kind of overwhelming us. Maybe not overwhelming us, but maybe overwhelming the governments, people trying to create stability. Yeah, it's really hard work, and if we're thinking about this new moon, we just shouldn't forget that it's, as I've just been saying, this new moon is, because it's in late signs, it's kind of a bit of a Janus. Janus is a Roman god that looks, or is it a Greek? I don't know. Janus is a god. I think it's a Roman god, Janus, who's got two faces, looking in the past, looking in the future. I know that Janus is associated with Gemini, and this is not a Gemini new moon, but it still has that sense of looking at perhaps the problems of the past and the opportunities of the future. And so that might be a way of looking at it. And I do like to look at new moons from a perspective of midpoints. So this means thinking about what midpoints the new moon is on, because I think that does give us a fairly good insight. So let's look at the 90-degree dial. So the 90-degree dial, there is a new moon. So what we're going to do is we're going to put the dial on the new moon. It's just to see what midpoints the new moon is on. Sorry, it's taking its time. So these are the midpoints, and the midpoints. Some of the midpoints that I'm interested in is that I'm interested in the fact that the new moon is on the Uranus Aries midpoint. So there is the Aries point, and there's Uranus. So with this new moon on the Uranus Aries midpoint, I think that is potentially quite dramatic. It's very close as well. I mean, it's only 3 arc minutes from the Uranus Aries midpoint, and Uranus Aries is quite revolutionary. It is Uranus, the planet of revolutions. The Aries point is the world, and what is happening in this world, and the new moon might really unleash something. And why are things being unleashed? Probably because of what's been happening in the past. Hence this concept of the final reckoning. It's also on the Uranus-Neptune midpoint. So there's Uranus. Forget the midheaven at the moment, because the midheaven is just specific to a particular place. But just on a Uranus-Neptune and the Uranus-Aries midpoint. So the Uranus-Neptune midpoint, well, that's kind of really different. Reinhold Ebertin says about Uranus-Neptune that it is about the elimination of the waking consciousness. That it's like we can't see straight. Maybe we're almost sleepwalking into something. That is a possibility. There's just moments where we're not fully aware. And that might be a personal experience of this new moon. Remember, this new moon is trine Uranus, and it's on the Uranus-Neptune midpoint. We might just kind of not be thinking about anything at all, and we just flip into something. And that's okay. We can deal with that, provided we're not doing anything safety critical. If we stay at home, sit on the floor, flip into something different, well, okay. But, what about governments? What about society? What if there's a certain lack of awareness about what is going on in the world? Well, that could be dangerous. That could be very dangerous. Chemicals, Uranus, Neptune, you might think about that. You could say chemical explosion, pollution, something to do with chemicals or drugs or something like that with Uranus, Neptune. That's certainly a possibility. So we have to be rather careful with that. Now, if you want to be perhaps positive about this new moon, I mean, it is on some midpoints of some personal planets, because it is, it's coming in. I mean, you've got all those planets in late Capricorn. So this new moon is on the Mercury-Venus midpoint, and it is on the Venus-Mars midpoint. And so being on the Mercury-Venus midpoint, I mean, let's be positive about this new moon. It is a very creative new moon. It might be a somewhat difficult new moon, but certainly creative. We can create all sorts of wonderful things, especially as it's on the Uranus-Neptune, on the Uranus-Neptune midpoint. Okay, Uranus-Neptune is elimination of a waking consciousness, but if we're an artist, or if we rely on our imagination, there are things we can get in touch with. We can be very inspired, and we can actually articulate this inspiration. Okay, maybe not immediately, but we can potentially be in touch with all sorts of things, and we can get a real idea about where things are heading. And it may be that the cosmos will indeed be talking to us at some level. We've got to understand those words. And also, this new moon is on the Venus-Mars midpoint. Venus-Mars is about attraction, and it's got sexual connotations, and it's how people relate to one another, and it can be about charisma. And so there is something quite charismatic about this new moon in the hands of some people. So perhaps someone who is clever can use the power of this new moon to attract followers, attract fans, whatever you need to attract. So that is something about this new moon which I would regard as being potentially quite favourable, but maybe also dangerous, because one has to be careful of attractive people with big promises. What are they offering, and what's going to happen in the end? We don't want to be seduced into something or agreeing to something that might potentially have a negative result. So this new moon can be set to different locations. One can use astrocartography, and so if one does the astrocartography of this new moon, let me do that. So let's create an astro map. Okay, so here's the astro map, and I hope you can see this astro map. But what comes to mind is this line here. You see this red line here? So this red line is all the places at the time of the new moon which are where Uranus is on the midheaven. In a sense, that's the gateway. Uranus is brought down to Earth, down this meridian, and you can see that this goes through London. It goes through Spain, pretty close to Barcelona, and goes through Africa. So those might be a couple of countries to watch out for. And this yellow line, those are all of the planets that are where Saturn is on the descendant, and this goes through Turkey, it goes through Egypt, does go through Kiev, the capital of Ukraine. So those countries perhaps one needs to think about. Does it go through Caracas? There's Caracas, the capital of Venezuela. Not exactly. So then there's Tehran. Jupiter is on the midheaven in Tehran, but let's have a look at those. There you are. If you can't see it, there's Tehran with Uranus, with Jupiter on the midheaven, and so starting off with the London chart. So this is a new moon set for London, and Uranus is exactly on the midheaven. And true black moon Lilith, I use true black moon Lilith, I don't use mean black moon Lilith. True black moon Lilith is on the IC. So there is this Uranus black moon Lilith opposition at the time of a new moon. Now that might say something about what the new moon is all about. I mean, perhaps I should have said that this new moon is not just trine Uranus, it is also sextile true black moon Lilith. It does link with that Uranus black moon Lilith opposition, true black moon Lilith, and that might give perhaps a dark twist to this new moon. And I think you've already seen that there is a certain darkness to this new moon, and it's easy for something to come about, for something to manifest. And from a London perspective, having Uranus on the midheaven represents the government, and we know that the government is under permanent pressure, that just, things are not happy in Britain, as far as I can see. And so there might be some shocks as far as the government. It might say something about Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer is, we know he's under permanent pressure, and so having a Uranus on the midheaven is just not going to make things easy for him. And so we need to look at what is happening. And this new moon, this Uranus on the midheaven, is also trine the trine the new moon, so it really picks up on that Uranus trine the new moon. So Britain is certainly a country to look at, and then we can set the chart for Kiev, the capital of Ukraine. And what's kind of interesting about this chart is the position of Saturn. So we have Saturn is exactly on the descendant. Saturn could say something about enemies, but it's not great for Ukraine, particularly as Saturn is sextile the midheaven. So one might think that Saturn is going to create further problems. Of course, it's difficult to be precise when you've got a war going on, just constant war. And I think we perhaps shouldn't be thinking so much of the war with this Saturn on the descendant, but perhaps the kind of pressure that the Ukrainian government is put under with Saturn on the IC, Saturn making a square to the ascendant. So making a square to the midheaven. Now you might be thinking about Iran, and I've been watching the news on Iran, and so the general consensus seems to be that you had this big uprising, and by and large the uprising seems to have been quelled, for the moment at least, and that the Iranian government is back in control. So the question is, what is this new moon going to do for Iran? And so here is a new moon set for Iran. And what's kind of interesting is that we have Jupiter exactly on the midheaven. And so how do we see that? I mean, Jupiter on the midheaven, well, you could say that Jupiter is quite a fortunate planet. And so with Jupiter on the midheaven, that may actually be supportive of the Iranian government. Maybe that's not what you wanted to hear. I mean, you could also say, well, Jupiter is going to burst the bubble, or finally things are going to fall apart. But I'm not convinced here. I think that Jupiter on the midheaven is perhaps not what the Iranian regime's enemies want to see, but it certainly means that Iran is going to continue being in the news, and I don't know whether Trump is going to attack it, but I think for some reason perhaps you could argue that at the time of a new moon, the Iranian government, for one reason or another, might be quite pleased with itself. I mean, so you contrast this with the British government, the new moon set for London, you've got Uranus on the midheaven, and new moon set for Tehran, the capital of Iran, you've got Jupiter on the midheaven. So it'll be interesting to compare those two countries and how their governments fare. And I think we should quickly look at Venezuela to see if anything is going on in Venezuela. And Venezuela, I don't see anything especially dramatic in the Venezuela chart. That doesn't mean to say nothing's going to happen in Venezuela, but we don't see any sort of great sort of angularity there. So maybe the places we should be thinking about, maybe Britain, maybe the Ukraine. And so finally, I asked a question, or I was considering, what people, what countries, might be impacted by this new moon. I haven't come up with a huge amount of people. I didn't find a great deal. So as far as countries are concerned, possibly Ireland. This is the horoscope of the Easter rising. So this is April 24th, 1916, and then there was an insurrection against British rule. Okay, the insurrection short term did not succeed, but the British were heavy-handed. They executed a lot of rebels, which turned what was at the time not a particularly popular thing. I don't think that immediately the Irish people were particularly enthused by this rebellion, but the British reaction to it was what made the rebellion successful. And I do think that this is potentially the beginning of Ireland, even though the British still controlled Ireland afterwards. It's like with the Declaration of Independence, July the 4th, 1776. We take the July the 4th, 1776 chart, even though it took some time for the colonists to take control. So this is arguably a chart for the beginning of Ireland, and the moon is at 2822 Capricorn, and it's opposition Neptune. And so this new moon, right on Ireland's moon, that says something about the people, the Irish people. Things they're not happy about. Maybe the people are rebellious, like they were in 1916. So I think the new moon, from an Irish perspective, could really sort of stir things up. Now, a couple of people, one person who may be impacted by this new moon is Lindsey Graham. Lindsey Graham, he's a senator for one of the Carolinas. I forget which one it is, and he's major neocon. He really wants the United States to intervene everywhere, to put as much as possible into Ukraine, to overthrow Iran, whatever. And so here's Lindsey Graham's chart set for noon. Now, Lindsey Graham has his Mars at 29 degrees Cancer. So this new moon is opposition Lindsey Graham's Mars. So that new moon opposition Lindsey Graham's Mars, it could be quite frustrating for him. I mean, he is angry. He has certainly got this anger. Mars in Cancer, Mars opposition Uranus. In fact, this new moon is opposition his Mars Uranus. That's why he's perhaps so into starting wars or wants America to get involved in everything. He's projecting his Mars Uranus in Cancer onto his country, and so this new moon is triggering his Mars-Uranus conjunction. So we might see that Lindsey Graham is more active than usual and is really screaming for intervention, and perhaps is getting frustrated if things don't necessarily go America's way. So that's someone who perhaps we should be looking at. And there's always news about Bitcoin. I don't know if you've been following Bitcoin at all, but Michael Saylor has got his company Strategy, and Strategy is basically trying to buy up as much Bitcoin as possible. So what his company Strategy is doing is it's through very complicated financial mechanisms, which I don't understand at all. But he's been basically creating debt, and with this debt, he's been buying Bitcoin, and this is something he's been doing, I think, since 2020. And Michael Saylor has his Venus at 29 degrees Capricorn, and it is trine his Mars. So Michael Saylor is quite an outspoken advocate for Bitcoin, and he has a lot of followers and supporters. Doesn't mean he's right, but he has got the new moon on his Venus, new moon trine his Mars, and that may say something about how he presents himself and what he's doing. I mean, maybe this is good news for him. Maybe he's actually going to benefit from that new moon on his Venus, particularly as it's trine his Mars. And he's also Uranus is at the end of Taurus. So he's got a lot of planets aspecting his Venus Mars trine, including the new moon, including Saturn, and I don't have a time of birth for him. So you could say that Uranus hitting his Venus could represent some big change involving his company, for better or for worse. I don't even think I want to hazard a guess about whether it's going to be good or bad, but I think that Michael Saylor and perhaps strategy as well, his company strategy, may certainly be influenced by this new moon. And finally, there is the King of Jordan. So, King of Jordan, I have some sympathy with the King of Jordan, King Abdullah II. When I went to a boarding school, and in the playground at the boarding school, it was kind of quite bizarre, because there was this man with a gun in the playground. There was this detective, and it was from a perspective of a child. I don't know how old I was, 10. This man, having a gun. It's really bizarre, particularly in the UK, when the police don't carry guns and there isn't a gun culture. And the reason he was carrying a gun is because Prince Abdullah, he went to the school. I think there was one term when I was in the same class as him. I seem to remember he was much better at French than he was. I think I got on quite well with Abdullah at the time. It wasn't for very long, but I certainly remember him when I was at school, and I certainly remember some of the security around him. The early 70s were pretty dangerous as far as the Middle East is concerned. So I have some sympathy with Abdullah II. And Abdullah II, he has Mars rising, and he has Mars at 27 degrees 49 Capricorn. And in the past, every now and then I see something problematic coming up in Abdullah's chart, but nothing's happened so far. So I'm not saying anything will happen, but this new moon is right on Abdullah II's Mars. He's also got Uranus, obviously, trine his Mars, and Saturn hitting his Mars. So a lot of planets are on his Mars. So if I were to advise Abdullah II, I would have said, over the next couple of weeks, he probably has to be careful how he goes. I mean, it might not just be about his security. It might be about his country, how he's organising his country. I don't really know a great deal about Jordan, but I know that being king of Jordan must be a difficult job. There are all sorts of things going on, all sorts of pressures to deal with. I mean, you've got you get a lot of support from the United States, but you've got to also worry about what Israel is doing and the Palestinians. Yeah, it's a difficult job, and maybe the next couple of weeks will be quite trying for him. And maybe also with a new moon on his Mars, he may feel he has to do something. He has to take some kind of initiative. I mean, he's got a very strong Mars. I mean, he's got Mars in Capricorn, and Mars in Capricorn, exalted in Capricorn. So maybe the new moon will be a positive. But with Uranus as well, he might be tempted to do something which is perhaps impulsive. It seems like a good idea, but it might not be a good idea. So I would advise Abdullah II to act with a certain amount of caution. So that's it. That's all I've got to say about this new moon. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again very soon.